Hey, it's Carrie Joe.
Hey, it's Anna. Join us as we learn new things, challenge our assumptions, and grow as people. Welcome to the Heretical Hippies podcast.
In this season, we are going to explore the intersection of curiosity and wonder, and hopefully develop some fresh ways to see the world and ourselves. So come along for the ride, or don't. Either way, we're going to hit record. Hey, welcome back, beautiful people, to another Heretical Hippies podcast episode. I'm here, as always, with my friend Anna.
What?
And today we have a really special guest. I'm particularly very excited about it. I've listened to this guy's podcast for probably about 2 years now, and it has served as such an encouragement, such a useful thing to provide me with tools of how to interact with the world on a day-to-day basis. And I cannot be more excited to introduce you to Noah Rasheta. Noah, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So I'm just going to read a little bio that I have about you. You can feel free to jump in and correct and add to anything you'd like. So Noah is the voice behind the Secular Buddhism podcast and the author of several best-selling books, sharing mindfulness teachings with millions worldwide. By day, Noah is a director of marketing and an IT leader, blending creativity, strategy, and technical expertise to drive innovation in the data infrastructure space. Beyond that, he's a passionate adventurer exploring the skies on a paraglider, teaching meditation and cherishing time with his family. Noah's mission is to share timeless philosophies and cutting-edge tools that enrich how we experience life, because life is an experience to be had, not a game to be won. I love that. So much wisdom, even in just a few paragraphs. That's what I love about your podcast, Noah. They're not an hour long, which I love because sometimes I get overwhelmed by that. But they're so packed full of wisdom and your lived experience, just making it very concise for us beginners. So thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. I think Anna has a question that she would like to ask you to get the ball rolling.
Sure. Yeah. So last night I listened to the episode 198, Between What Was and What Will Be, the Bardo episode, and that was so good. First of all, being in Christianity, I learned how to pray, but being out of Christianity, I really have more so practiced Buddhism since then. And so I learned how to meditate in that space. But there is this in between that I feel like I've never heard that word before. And I feel like it's everywhere in life. It's just, I was telling Carrie Joe before we got on here, I feel most of life is, now I know Bardo in throughout Buddhist history is typically meant more for the in between after death and the, what was it, in between lives, right? But you're applying it in a more practical way to us today in our day-to-day lives. And I love that concept. I love that you're transitioning it. It kind of reminds me of Carrie Joe, how we've taken some scriptures and we've rewritten them to apply to us now,
Yeah.
And I just love that there's more people doing that kind of work and making things accessible and just relatable, you know? So I guess my question is, I want to know more about Noah. I want to know how you got to this place where you're able to take this kind of helpful but ancient information and make it accessible to people.
Yeah, so like a little background story. Let's see, it was 2010 was kind of the pivotal year for me that I would say was the start of my transition in my worldview. And it started by just going through the difficult things that you go through in life, right? Different events that you encounter. One particular event that I was dealing with at the moment was just what felt like the impending collapse of my marriage. We were in a pretty rough spot, and as I was trying to navigate that, the thing I wanted to hold to tightly that felt safe, like my sure footing or the firm foundation that I had, was my belief system. And as I anchored myself to that, and really went down the rabbit hole of trying to be the best version of that particular belief that I could be, I started to encounter specific historical accounts or even uh, doctrines that I just couldn't really make sense of. So when I started to feel that sense of insecurity or that sense of uncertainty, I started to want to cling to it even tighter. So it's like, okay, let me study it more, read more, go deeper down that rabbit hole. And it was having the opposite effect because the deeper down I went, the more insecurity I felt and the more confusion I was feeling around my belief system. So I was
Mhm.
feeling this impending collapse. Well, actually, I would say, the proverbial rug being pulled from under my feet was the feeling that I was experiencing. And up until that time in my life, my worldview consisted really of having a deep sense of certainty. This is the right belief system. This is the correct path that I'm on. And when that started to crumble beneath my feet, there was deep desperation and fear and panic. And I started to um, reach out and research other worldviews. I remember the first time that it occurred to me, maybe my belief system isn't the correct one.
Mm.
And that sent me into this deep state of seeking for truth. And I started listening to audio lecture series and reading all the books. I had always enjoyed philosophy, and my mindset at the time was, if this isn't the correct path, then I'll find the correct path. So I went into that seeker mode, right? And I remember I listened to what is it, the Great Courses on Audible. There was a lecture series called, I think it was called The Meaning of Life, presented by the major world religions or something to that effect.
Hmm.
And I was listening to these presenters. They had a representative talking about Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And I was semi familiar with all of them. I remember I had my little notepad and I'm just taking notes and thinking, I'll encounter something that will feel more correct. And then that's the direction I'll head. And went through all of the presenters, and they're all kind of answering the essential big life questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What happens when we die? And as I'm going through all the different explanations, it's kind of like, I don't know about that. Keep my notes. Let's move on to the next one. And the last presenter was talking about Buddhism. And I remember the very start of the presentation was, if you're looking for the answers to these big questions, we don't have them. We don't
Hmm.
entertain it from that perspective. We look at the question and we ask, why does this question matter? Who is the one asking the question? Why is there such a strong need to know? And it was just such a shift in focus rather than fixating on what are the answers. It was entirely, what is the source of the questions? Why does this question matter? What if the question isn't relevant? And I remember it was like a physical light bulb moment. I remember putting my notepad down and feeling like, that's it. I'm done. I'm not looking for the answer to these questions. I've never sat with the questions. And now it had never occurred to me to sit with the questions. And I think I'm going to maybe stop my quest for a little bit and just ponder the questions for a little bit. So that was the start. And the further I went down that rabbit hole of, I remember thinking, who thinks this way? Okay, that I want to learn more about that. Let's learn. Where does this come from? And the more I was studying Buddhism and the ideas behind Buddhism, the more I started to feel this sense of, I don't need to have the answers to life's questions. I can become comfortable with the uncertainty because so much of life is unknown. I don't know what happens tomorrow. I don't know what happens 10 years from now. I certainly don't know what happens when I die. I don't know why I'm here. And I started to get more and more comfortable with the approach of, um, some ideologies will say you're going to feel a deep sense of peace and contentment when you have what feels like a solid answer to life's questions. But the problem is, as you know, if you start to doubt that, then it's the ground shakes beneath, right? That your firm foundation is the answers to the questions. Where Buddhism comes along and says, hey, let's just take a hammer to the ground and go ahead and destroy everything that you're standing on. So much of life is uncertain. Can I get comfortable with the uncertainty of life and still enjoy the experience of being alive? And that's what took me down this path. And the rest is kind of history. And ever since then, I've really enjoyed the tools and the mindsets and the concepts and the ideas that come from Buddhism. And that's what motivated me to start sharing them. I thought, man, had this been explained in a more simple way or in a way that the me of back then would have understood, it would have been very useful early on. So that's been my goal and my mission with all of this is how do I present these ideas to essentially to the me of 2010 that's not
Mhm.
interested in becoming anything, not interested in another ism in my life, but I want these concepts and ideas to be applicable to my everyday life to help me be a better whatever I already am.
Mhm.
And you do a very great job at that, by the way. That's why I engaged with your podcast so much. At that
Mhm.
time when I started, I was like, "Oh, this is perfect. I don't have to change. I don't have to do anything. I can apply this stuff." But that also leads me to a question because the podcast title is Secular Buddhism. So I would love if you could define for our listeners and us what the difference between secular Buddhism and traditional Buddhism would be.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll start by saying early on, I I had no interest in another ism in my life. And the thought of studying Buddhism and getting into Buddhism, but I had a conflict inside. It's like I want more of this, but I also don't want this label and I don't want to adhere to another what could be another rigid system in my life. So at first the approach was this it feels safer to call it secular Buddhism. But the more I learned about Buddhism, the more I realized Buddhism in and of itself is a non-theistic tradition that is very secular in nature, at least compared to the way we think about religions from our Western mindset. So, ironically, with time, it kind of occurred to me, I don't think it needs secular in front of it. But I also realized by calling it that, people who don't have much knowledge of Buddhism, it's a softer entry because they realize, okay, this isn't, you don't have to be a Buddhist. So now I would say the difference, the way I view it, it's just the approach with how I want to talk about the teachings or the concepts or the ideas to make it very clear that you can approach Buddhism as a practice, as a philosophy, and not as a form of religion. Although it certainly is a religion, right? Like it's going to show up on any form if you have to choose your religion. It's one of those options. But by thinking about it as a secular thing, secular Buddhism, it just kind of reminds you that you don't have to use what you learn from Buddhism to be a Buddhist. You truly can use these ideas to just be a better whatever you already are. So that's why I like using it, the name, and making it very clear that there's no preaching here. There's no trying to convince anyone to become a Buddhist. I think of Buddhism as a practice in the way that you would think of yoga as a practice.
That's awesome. I love that you're just making it accessible. And one part in particular that resonated with me was when you were having questions about you or a form of religion, you dug deeper. And I think I can relate to that very much
Mhm.
so. Like I was like, I actually had a crossroads in my own, and I was like, either I am completely wrong about all this, or I've got to dig deeper and better understand what I'm actually doing here. And it did the same thing for me. It just led me down that path of initially it was beautiful because I felt like I was getting more information that was giving me a bigger picture, and that was in some ways improving perspective, but it didn't answer the hard questions, that I still had. And a lot of the content that you're providing for people, it feels like a caring uncle or something or a caring father that's coming alongside and just saying, "Here, by the way, this might be helpful information for you." Because everybody is a seeker, I feel like. We're all still seeking in some ways. And at least I feel like that's from my experience. Like, I'm content being no ism, having no ism, but my feelers are always up for better understanding of the world around me or better understanding of how to be a good person or, whatever. And that's the kind of stuff you're giving people is just some tidbits of wisdom that helps us be and guide us a little bit, I think. I love it. It's really good. And so one of the things I thought of when I was listening to your podcast was my question was, how much of your former religion do you feel like you bring into it? And that was, you answered that already when you were saying like basically you're talking to yourself in 2010 in a lot of ways, you know, like what would I want to know? And I'd like to know, is there any aspect of Mormonism that you have held on to as a person that you still apply to life today?
Yeah, so it's still very much a part of my shared experience because my wife is still practicing believing Mormon. My
Mhm,
kids go to church with her, so it's a part of our family dynamic. As far as the worldview or the doctrinal beliefs, I would say I don't really share any of it, except maybe one thing that does kind of resonate still. So, one thing that the founder of Mormonism, that Joseph Smith talked about early on in the teachings, there was this concept of eternal progression. The
mm,
idea is called eternal progression. And the idea is that you continue to progress throughout not just this life, but for eternity in terms of knowledge and wisdom and righteousness and all the things, right? And so, what that idea has done for me that I think still sticks with me is I think of eternal progression on the spectrum of intelligence or knowledge. And while I don't believe in the classical sense of there being a God that's watching over and has an agenda for us humans and stuff, I don't view it from that perspective. But when I think about the cosmos, or I think about the vastness of the unknown, and I feel that sense of awe of like, here we are as a speck of dust in the middle of such bigness, right? Such grandiosity of the universe. If there's a spectrum of intelligence or of anything at all, and it's infinite, then it feels very humbling to me to think, I don't have to figure anything out. And the example I'll give you where I feel this a lot, I have a pet, a little pet dog, and I have a great relationship with the dog. We're really close. And I can see it's measurable the difference of the intelligence between my dog and me, right? Me as the human, him as the dog, and his little view of here's our day. I get to run outside, go to the bathroom, and then I come in. I'll get to sit on your lap for a little bit. And it's like, I would never expect my dog to know what it is to be me, to deal with the complexities of work and coworkers and the stress of paying bills and all the things that are just that's not in the wheelhouse of being a dog. And then I think about I'm that dog to the universe. And
Hmm.
I would never have the audacity or the arrogance, it feels like, for me to speculate, this is what the universe wants of me. This is
mm,
what I'm expected to know about the great unknown. I can just think,
mm,
just like, and that's a measurable difference of intelligence between a human and a dog. If you're talking about if there is a God and that God is infinitely wise or powerful or whatever, that's not measurable, the difference of intelligence between me and that being. So, why on earth would I ever think that I can figure out what that means for me or that I could extract out of that some kind of a meaning of this is how I should live my life or this is what I should be
mm,
doing? Like, I don't expect that of my dog. So, that's
mm,
an aspect of like what I would call kind of like deep doctrine Mormonism, the idea of eternal progression that feels okay for me. It doesn't
mm,
like that doesn't mean that I would acknowledge there is a God or isn't. I still leave that in the realm of the unknown, but it almost feels like it absolves the desire in me to figure things out. Because on
mm,
in the scale of intelligence, if there's something more intelligent than humans, then I don't need to figure that out. How could I? I'm not capable. I don't have the ability to know what it would be like to be something more intelligent than humans because I can only think within the human realm. And then I that gives me a deep sense of peace in a way because I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to
mm,
have the answers. I don't have to seek for truth. I can just figure out how do I live my life a little bit more peacefully, you know? Like you said earlier, seeking more understanding, sure. Seeking more skill and being a better spouse, father, whatever I am, coworker, sure. But to have truth, no, that's not what I'm seeking.
mm, mm.
In the same way that my dog is not seeking to be anything other than just a little dog. So that I would say that's probably the only remnant of that worldview that
Mhm.
still feels like I can hold space for that, and I actually enjoy that thought.
I imagine that's very freeing. Coming from a system of belief that, like you mentioned earlier, you are always striving to know the truth, capital T truth, and to have the answer, to have that certainty. And that is definitely something that Anna and I encountered in our experience of religion as well, that we feel very free from. But I think it's interesting that that one, like you said, maybe not doctrine, but like a teaching at least within that belief system, it is transferable, and that is interesting for me to consider when I think about how I basically have chucked the baby out with the bathwater, not without thought, not without concern and thinking and really considering things, but I have a hard time finding things that I want to apply to my current day living. But I do have a similarity with your story that I would kinda like to circle back around to if you don't mind sharing a little bit with us. So my husband and I both deconstructed around the same time. I feel like if we're gonna put, like, a measurement on this, he maybe went to the deep end of the pool, and I'm, like, way out in the middle of the ocean. Like, that's kind of how I would describe the progression of our deconstruction. He would still hold to a lot of the core teachings of Jesus, which I don't disagree with, but I wouldn't want to necessarily put my foot in that camp anymore. So it sounds like something similar happened with you and your wife, and would you mind sharing with us how you both navigated that and maybe offer any kind of like just broad advice that you can give to anybody who might be kind of going through a similar thing of deconstructing while their partner may not be?
Yeah, yeah, because that is a scary part of the deconstruction phase. And I remember thinking, man, this is going to be the end of our marriage. Like I had mentioned earlier, we were already on the rocks. And when I started to deconstruct, I I knew I would have bet money on it that the day that I come out and say, you know what, I don't believe that in this anymore, that's the day that we start the divorce process. And I didn't want that, and I felt so much anxiety and consternation around the thought that that's where it's going to go, and so I delayed and delayed and delayed, and it was like closeted non-believer for at least a year, and then one day I couldn't contain it anymore, and I felt like I was so inauthentic to my the way I was living my life, and I remember through tears and, like, deep sorrow, the day that I told her, "I'm so sorry, I don't believe this stuff, it just doesn't make sense to me," and I was so surprised that it didn't go the way that I thought. It felt like she I think what it did is, for a moment, it made us realize we can actually see each other the way we really are, and there's no pretending. Ironically, that's actually the key to having a more healthy relationship. It was the start of building a new, significantly stronger and more authentic and vulnerable relationship between the two of us because we were on a new path of this is the real me and this is the real you. And how do we sort this out? And the long story short version of that is that we're significantly stronger in our relationship now than we were back then. But to get to your question, transitioning through that, at first it's scary, especially on her part, because from her perspective, with her worldview, it is risky to be with someone who doesn't share those same beliefs. And that particular worldview, like you have to be with someone who shares those views, or you don't end up in the same place after you die. So it's kind of it was a scary proposition to say, how are we going to navigate life with a believer and a non believer? And we started it by just saying, we don't know. We don't know how we're going to, but we'll do it day by day. And over time, what she realized is, well, we both realized, hey, we still have the same shared values. We still have the same overall goals of how we want to parent, how we envision being the type of spouse that we want to be, and things of that nature. So the values. And that allowed us to just continue on the same trajectory. And then here's where another concept from Mormonism prevailed, and that's the idea. I don't know if this is true among other forms of Christianity, but in Mormonism, there's kind of this overall idea that we come to Earth to be tested, and if you, so to speak, if you pass the test, and you're worthy, you get to return to be in the presence of God, right? That's kind of in a nutshell, that's the purpose of life, is to be tested. While I don't believe that, I do believe that if that's true and if it's a test, then you can't cheat the system. You can't be like, well, I'm a good test taker and that's the only reason I got to go to heaven. I like to believe if that's true and it's a test, you're being tested for your character and what's in your heart and what motivates you to be a kind person. Y are you gonna go to heaven because, "Oh, I was kind because I was afraid of going to hell," or "I was kind because I wanted to get to heaven." I don't think that's going to fly. So I like to believe if that's true and this is a test, then the only proper way to do it is with complete authenticity, to live the life the way it feels right to you in your heart, because that's gotta be how it works. So I remember discussing this with my wife early on as we were transitioning through this new stage, where I assured her, "Look, this is going to be scary, but you believe that this is a test, right?" And she was like, "Yeah, that's one of my core beliefs, is that we're here to be tested." And I said, "If that's true, you have to trust the process. What if part of your test is God wanted to see what kind of a person are you going to be if you are married to someone who doesn't believe what you believe? What if I'm actually part of your test and I'm following what makes sense to me in my heart because that's how it was supposed to be for you?" And I've shared that even with like my extended family on her side, like for you guys too, because it's hard for them to have
Mm,
a member of the family, the spouse of the daughter that they love and that they care for, and they're concerned about her eternal salvation, to be married to someone who doesn't believe this anymore. That's scary. But I've expressed the same thing. But if this is a test, then what is there to be afraid of? Just follow what makes sense in your heart, because that's what I'm doing. And maybe that's part of the plan. Maybe that's what it was supposed to be, because that's how you're going to be tested, to be with someone who doesn't share your beliefs. And I said, and for me, I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to get to anywhere specific. I don't know what there is. What I do know is the type of person that I want to be. I do know what it feels like to be kind and to help others to feel at peace with who they are and how they are. And that's how I want to live my life. And in this case, for you, and talking to my wife, for you, if that means being a devout believer of this belief system, I support you. I'll be the first one to help you on your path to live the path that makes sense for you, because I do believe that we're all unique and we're all on our own path. The only time that this would get tricky is if you are feeling like you're not able to be authentic and genuine on your path. Then I would say, then why are you on that path? I wouldn't try to pull you from your path, but I would want you to question it. But if this path is fulfilling to you and it helps you to be a better person and it's just what makes sense to you, go for it. I'll be your number one supporter. And that's all I want in return. And that's how it's been. Over the years, that's what it's turned into. We're just two people who support each other. We are rooting for each other in our individual goals, our collective experience of, hey, we're living life. We get to live life. How do you want to live that life? And as long as our values are aligned enough, it's actually not difficult. We don't have to get caught up in what are our beliefs, because there are a lot of differences there, but those don't matter. There have always been differences in beliefs. She puts
mm.
ketchup on all of her breakfast. I put hot sauce on all of my breakfast, but that doesn't cause us to fight. It's like, yeah, I would
Mhm.
happily buy her ketchup if we run out at the store, even though I don't want it. I'm not gonna put it on my food, and that's how we approach our philosophy and our religion.
Mhm. That's
It's beautiful.
beautiful.
So beautiful.
Yeah. I'm curious, has your wife employed any Buddhist teachings in her daily practice?
She has, and so I would say, first of all, she's never been interested in Buddhism, in the sense, like, I don't think she's ever listened to one of my podcast episodes unless she overhears it while I'm recording. She read parts of my book when I was writing it, I would ask her, "Hey, how does this sound?" But she's never actually read my book. She's just not interested in the things that I'm interested in. And at first, it felt like almost wrong. Like, well, why don't you care about what I care about? Until I realized, that's how it's been about other things. I'm way into paragliding. She's never read a paragliding book. and I've read all of them, you know? Or, and vice versa, where I don't read her stuff, like her religious stuff. I'm not interested in that. I'm not going to read it, and I don't need to, and she doesn't need to back. So we jokingly say, she'll say, I've absorbed Buddhism just by being around Noah without maybe even talking about what it is she's absorbing, just through observing how I live my life. And probably the number one area where I've seen her absorb this is becoming more comfortable with uncertainty. She used to have a very like rigid approach to especially beliefs. Like I have to know if it's true or false, if it's right or wrong. And now I think she approaches her own worldview with a little bit of that Buddhist flavor of you don't have to have certainty in it. And that has given her a greater sense of peace and liberation because she can approach her Mormonism with the attitude of, this is a path that makes sense to me, and that's why I choose to be on it, rather than this is the true path. And even if it doesn't make sense to me, I need to be on it, right? That's difficult. And I've seen over the years her approach to her own religion feels more natural and more at peace because I don't think she's wrestling with that question anymore of, is it true? Now she's just like, these are my people. This is my path, and I'm fine with it. And
Mm.
it doesn't have to be true. Even if it wasn't, I would probably still walk this path. And I feel like that's a healthy way of approaching any worldview. So that, yeah, that's probably the number one way that she's taken it, and other little ideas have rubbed off on her. Different Buddhist teachings or expressions of like suffering and the idea of the two arrows. She'll bring that up sometimes. Like, I think this is a second arrow of suffering, not a first arrow. Stuff like that. So yeah, it permeates.
That's
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that you both have come to this place and are so gracious with one another. Carrie Joe and I both, even through our own personal deconstructions and our partners' personal deconstructions, have managed to stay together. But we know so many people haven't. And that's neither good nor bad. It's just, it is what it is. But when I do hear of people that are managing to find that place of acceptance, it can be so beautiful. And I love hearing I love hearing your story. It's awesome. So what about your kids? I'm curious, do they ask you questions about your walk as a non-Buddhist?
Yeah, they do. So they're still relatively young. My oldest is 16, and then we have 13 and 9. So
Mhm.
the two younger ones, they don't we've never really talked about anything that's Buddhism. We do have we've gone through phases where we'll do like in Mormonism, it's called family home evening, and it's a Monday nights families get together and you kind of have like the equivalent of a Sunday school lesson, and it's like a time for families to come together and kind of have like your in-home practice. So we don't do that, but we have adopted a form of a weekly planning session as a family where we talk about what's going on for the next week, schedule wise and everything. And I usually take the opportunity there to do like a quick lesson on a specific concept or idea that is like a family teaching. And we'll talk about uncertainty or suffering or skillful ways to navigate whatever. And it's very much from the Buddhist worldview and from the Buddhist perspective. And my wife and I had kind of talked about that look, they're going to church and learning everything from your worldview. I'd like to have the opportunity to present ideas from mine. And that's the setting where we do that as a family. And they're definitely absorbing it just because it permeates in our household. But my oldest, who's 16, he's now old enough that he thinks and he'll ask questions and he'll ask me questions. And my wife and I early on discussed this time of life when that happens, and the kids are asking questions. We both agreed it's very important to defend each other's worldviews and let the kids know that we're not approaching this from which one of us is right and which one of us is wrong, or looking for little opportunities to poke holes and jab at each other's worldviews. I said we can't have that. We have to be on a unified front here that says life is very personal and you are going to find the path that resonates for you, and we're showing that through example. Mommy's on this path. This is what makes sense for her. I'm on this path. This is what makes sense for me. But one day you need to decide what path makes sense for you. It might be one of these two. It might be something entirely different, and that'll be totally fine. But what we all need to know is we all respect and love each other and support each other on whatever path any of us are on. So in that sense, yeah, we've talked about things, and when he has questions that, um, what is this or what does that mean? We'll talk about it. Like I remember when he asked about the dinosaurs and like, how did all that happen with the dinosaurs disappearing, and where does Adam and Eve fall in all of this? And we were discussing all that, and we literally presented it as well. From mommy's point of view, this is how I believe that this happened. From daddy's point of view, this is how I think this could have happened. And we were very clear at the end of that discussion. But from your point of view, you get to look at all the, everything you're going to read and study in your life. You get to kind of decide what makes sense to you. What do you think happened? I said, because maybe there isn't a clear cut answer. Obviously, there isn't one, or the whole world would agree, but we don't agree. So you kind of get to look at all the facts and all the various interpretations and decide what makes sense to you. And he was just like, okay, like no biggie, because we weren't approaching it with who's right, who's wrong, who's more correct,
Mhm,
We don't do it like that. And I actually had a really cool experience with him last week. It was a milestone moment for me where he came in and into the room and just wanted to talk about life and philosophy and ideas. And we stayed up till like almost 2 a.m. just talking about life. And he was asking deeper questions there, like, so what do you believe happens when we die, or stuff like that. And it was
mhm,
really fun to be able to talk to him in a way where there were no answers to that. It was just like to be able to share my perspective of life is this really insanely cool experience that we're having, and we don't know the answers to so many of these questions. And it's okay to feel like but I have to know. That's okay. And it's also okay to be like, I don't know that I need to know. That's where I am with it. And just give him that permission to, yeah, entertain these questions, explore these questions, but don't think you're gonna have an answer. You might have a stage in life where you feel you have an answer, and if that's what gives you comfort, sure. But just so you know, something could come along and question that, and then you're gonna be right back to where you were thinking, "Oh, no. Do I know the answer?" So, it was fun to have that moment. He will for sure, continue to want to talk about these things, and maybe the others when they're older too. But like I said before, our unified stance was we're going to explain our view and support the idea that at the end of the day, your view is yours, and it doesn't have to match mine or hers, but it does need to feel like what makes sense to you. And if it doesn't, keep questioning, keep searching, find what does make sense to you, and we'll always support you. So I think they all feel that sense of support and empowerment to they don't feel like they're being pulled or swayed from, more my way or more her way. They don't feel that.
mhm,
That is such a healthy, balanced way to
mhm,
present things. And with like you just alluded to, like, with no coercion, there's no agenda. You're just laying it out before them. And I love that it equips them not only with information to consider and choose from of what they might want to believe, but also it's equipping them with critical thinking skills. Nobody's telling them what they have to believe about X, Y, and Z. They get to decide what makes sense for them, and which is in stark contrast, as you know, to teachings within churches. Like, you're just given this dogma, you're given the doctrine, you have to believe it, otherwise you're not a good whatever, right? You're not a good Christian, you're not a good whatever. I love how your wife is even able to parent that way. I just think that speaks volumes for her and her character of being able to kinda set some of the dogma aside and just be interested in what's the best interest for your children. I just my hat's off to both of you. I think that's really awesome.
Well, you're encouraging
Thanks.
authenticity in your marriage, and now you're also transferring that desire for your children to be authentic and opening the door for them to be themselves and, figure it out with you along their side, obviously helping them and encouraging them and supporting them. But it's beautiful. I love it. I love that your kids get to have that kind of experience. It's actually, I don't know, maybe it's not as unique as I think it is, but I don't talk to a lot of families that have it.
Yeah, it's very
So,
refreshing to hear that.
mhm. Yeah. Wow, Noah, such a cool story. Well, do you wanna keep doing the podcast? Is this something that you see yourself doing long term? Do you have a sangha that you go to where you meet other Buddhists? Have you had very many Buddhists reach out to you and encourage you? What are some of the thoughts about some of those questions? Because I have a bunch and I don't have a ton of time.
Yeah, so I do have the nearest in-person sangha to me from where I live is about an hour away,
Mm,
and for a little while I did go there, and it was slightly more on the spectrum of it felt like a religion.
mm,
There's a component to it that's more chanting, and now we're going
mm,
to recite this mantra, and the aspects of it that were it was a little less comfortable with.
mm,
So over time, I thought, I just want to do this my way and be able to talk about these ideas, have discussions, but not engage in some of the practices that they don't feel relevant to me for how I'm approaching Buddhism. So I kind of started my own, and it's online based, and it's with podcast listeners. And it's been many years now, but it's still to this day, it's about 50 to 60 of us that meet regularly every Sunday at noon. It's on Zoom, and the format is like a Dharma talk. I'll present a specific concept or idea, much like I do on the podcast, but it's a weekly format. And then we just discuss it, and people will share their insights around whatever last week's topic was. Because usually, here's the topic, and then here's the invitation. Think about this throughout the week and see what moments of insight or any nuggets of wisdom arise throughout the week, and share them with the group on the following call the next week. And that's been such a spiritually nourishing experience to do that every week, because you've got people from all over the world and different aspects of life, and they're sharing the practicality of these concepts and ideas, the way they show up for them in their lives, sharing it with each other. And we're all in different places in life, so we all get to benefit from that shared wisdom in those calls. So that's been my practice, my my weekly sangha.
Do you have some close friends that are also kind of on a similar walk as you?
Not really.
Mm,
In my what I would call like my in-person real life experience, I don't really have anyone who is on the path quite like that. There are people who have, I live in a very Mormon community, and there are the people who have left it. So that's one layer of connection that you have among each other, where it's like, okay, I know you left and I left. So you kind of feel a sense of camaraderie. There's that
mhm,
group, but that's not who I really engage with a whole lot. And then there's my other close group of friends. Our shared experience there is paragliding. So we get together and it's all about flying. But when it comes to talking about Buddhism and stuff, my outlet is either that Sangha or my podcast, which is, to your other question, I will continue doing it because I enjoy talking about it, and I almost treat it like this is a form of journaling, and I'm sharing
mhm,
my thoughts and my ideas, putting them out there with the thought that maybe one day my kids will listen to this. Because, like I said earlier, we don't really it's not like we go down the path of, "Let's talk about Buddhism at home." That's not really how it works. But I always think if the time comes where they want to know what's dad's way of viewing the world. Well, guess what? It's all out there. There are books and
mhm.
the hundreds of podcast episodes. Like, you could really get to understand how I viewed the world if you want to go listen. And that's a big motivator for me, is to keep producing the content in the sense of I'm journaling for my future kids, and maybe even their kids, to hopefully have the tools early on in life that I enjoyed and benefited so greatly for having these tools. But later in life, for me, it wasn't until, as an adult, that I encountered these things. So yeah, I will keep doing the podcast. I enjoy it. And if things evolved and changed to where it didn't make sense and I couldn't have it, I would probably still do it. Even if I wasn't publishing them, I'd just be recording them and saving them on a hard drive somewhere in case someone wants to listen someday in the future.
Carrie Jo and I have said the same exact words, like, we wanna keep doing it as long as we can and as long as it's fun for us, but we've also been I at least think we had that discussion early on, heavily motivated by the fact that, like, who is this gonna be for? Like, who wants to listen to a couple of middle-aged women talk about, their journey out of religion and into the great unknown, right? But I think they're especially for me, I have adult children that are no longer living at home 4 adult children that are no longer living at home, and they don't get to really be here for a lot of this process and be as involved with all the details of our walk, and so I think it'd be fun one day for them to be able to look back on or even, learn from possibly one day, so, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
heavy motivation for me too. We love our kids,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and maybe if they can learn a little bit more about life to help them in their journey, then it's worth it.
for sure.
Yeah. Man, this is awesome, Noah. It's been so fun talking to you. I feel like everyone should go out right now and like you could literally listen to any of your episodes and get something out of it. And like Carrie Joe said, most of them are 20 to 35 minutes or something like that. There's a few that are a little longer, but it's an easy listen, like, on your commute to work or, I don't know, while you're making dinner or whatever, just, like,
Mhm.
a really easy way to just fill your life with a little bit of extra wisdom and encouragement. So, thanks for doing it. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
definitely put the link to your podcast and also your book, which I've read, The No Nonsense Buddhism for Beginners. I loved it. We'll put those in the show notes. I'm wondering, is there a link to the Sangha or is that like a subscription based? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's part of um, the podcast community. So on the website, secularbuddhism.com, you've got the podcast episodes, and then there's a link that says community. And people who want to engage more with to have a sense of community, it is a subscription based, but there's a link for someone who can't afford to do it through the subscription. There's a link where you can just pay a one time whatever you can pay, and literally it could be like $1. And I've set it up that way because it does. If you have to at least do one step to get in, that's a much higher quality of people who join than someone who's just like, oh, this is free. I'll see what this is about. But if that's not possible, there's a third way in. That's another link on there that'll say I can't even do the pay one time thing. You can click that and just fill out your form, and then you'll gain access to it for free, because I never want to have something that could be useful or helpful to someone gated behind financial constraints. So it's totally open. If someone wants to be in there, you can be in there. And then once you're in, you're in. And we have an online platform. Circle is the name of the community or the app that we use, and you can kind of think of it like Facebook in a way, but it's just this one community. And there are meditation resources on there and community chat. Like it's a really neat space. We've got what is it, like 1,300 members on there that engage and share, and there are different practices too. Because I do the Sunday call. There's a Saturday, or there's a Monday meditation group that's led by someone in the community. There's a writing meditation group where they'll just write one prompt, and then everyone who's in that group, it's like a form of writing meditation where you respond to the prompt. There's a lot of resources in there for people who want to make this more of a practice. But yeah, that's on the website where it says community. That's where you would gain access to all of that. And I do have courses on there too, um, that people who want to learn more in a course format and follow it like lesson by lesson. That's on there as well.
That's awesome. I know that you have whet all of our appetites for learning more about Buddhism. I would love if you could kind of close us out with what you feel is a great entry or pivotal teaching for absolute beginners to the Buddhist practice. I'm putting you on the
Yeah, that's
spot.
a
Take
good.
your time.
um, okay, so I would say the first and perhaps the core teaching that permeates almost all Buddhist concepts and ideas is the understanding of the nature of suffering. Um, and I would say suffering extended to other words that you could use that are synonymous. Anguish, unsatisfactoriness is one that I really like. But the general idea is that life is difficult. To be alive is to experience difficulty. We're all going to experience loss, the loss of our loved ones, the loss of our health, the loss of our youth. And as we encounter these experiences in life that are the difficult ones. There are skillful ways to navigate those difficulties and unskillful ways. And when we navigate difficulties in an unskillful way, we make it even more difficult. And that's the what I alluded to earlier in our discussion, the two arrows of suffering. Like the first arrow of suffering is what happens to you in life. You're driving along, you get a flat tire. I didn't want a flat tire, so here I am experiencing difficulty because I've encountered something that I didn't want. That's that's fine. That's totally normal. That's natural. That's the first arrow of suffering. The second arrow is now I'm so upset that I got this flat tire that, I'm kicking the tire and I break my toe because I'm mad. Well, that was a second arrow of suffering. How I engage with the discomfort of the first arrow, that is the second arrow. And there are skillful and non-skillful ways to approach that suffering. Buddhism is all about giving us the tools to be able to discern between the first and second arrows of suffering and to navigate suffering skillfully. Not to avoid suffering because you can't, right? We're all going to experience difficulties in life, but we can encounter it more skillfully. That's probably the core teaching that people are going to gain when they start to learn about Buddhism. And then I would say secondary to that, it comes in pretty closely as one of the next basic teachings is to have a more skillful view of reality. We
Mhm.
go through life thinking that there's this picture of reality that is very certain. And all I need to do is look at it close enough, hard enough, long enough, and I'll figure it out and be like, that's reality. And the truth is, we can't. The analogy here is that we're like blind people describing an elephant, and we're all standing at different vantage points. One's describing the trunk of the elephant, while another one's describing a leg, one's describing the tail, and so on. And everybody's so certain this is what an elephant is, and they're describing a very limited portion of that elephant. That's us going through life. We're all blind to the big picture because we can't see it from any other vantage point than the one that we have. I don't know what it is to be a woman. You don't know what it is to be a man. I don't know whatever you've gone through in your life and your experience. I just don't know that. You don't know, you probably don't know what it is to be a paraglider pilot caught in a thermal flying in the air, right? Like that's just not your lived experience. So the mistake that we make is thinking my reality is the accurate one and yours isn't, or vice versa.
Mhm.
So that's where this second teaching that I think is so helpful from the Buddhist perspective is the understanding that you don't have the full picture and you never will. So at the very best, what we can do is have the goal to try to understand each other a little bit better because our perspectives of reality are unique, but more importantly, they're incomplete. And no matter how much I think I've got life figured out, I don't because I don't have the big picture. And we can see this through space and time. You stand where you stand, and I stand where I stand. But in terms of time, just think about it among your own perspective that how I viewed the world 10 years ago is not how I view it now, or 20 years ago, or how I may view it 10 years into the future might not be how I view it now. So there is never this cohesive picture of there's reality. Now I've got the picture. You'll just never have that. So from the Buddhist perspective, when you understand that, you kind of let go of that attachment to having to have the right view of the world. It's like there isn't one. There's the present understanding of reality, and it's incomplete and it's totally unique to you. And that's the best you're going to get. And that one changes moment to moment, day to day, year to year. But it also changes if you were standing in someone else's shoes, because now that's another perspective, another reality. So instead of fighting over who's the most accurate in their interpretation of reality, why don't we just try to understand each other a little bit better? And if that's hard, just try to understand your own evolution of your perspectives of reality and let go of this idea of certainty and the idea of having it all figured out, and instead focus on how can I just be a better whatever I already am. And today, how I'm living my life today, could I be living it a little bit more skillfully with a little bit more kindness and a little bit more compassion than I did yesterday or than I did 5 minutes ago? And that's it. It doesn't have to be bigger than that. And that is a honorable way to live your life, to just try to enjoy the experience. Like I always say, life is an experience to be had, and you get to experience it moment to moment to moment, and you're under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago, or a day ago, or a year ago. And that extends into the future too. I can say, yeah, okay, that was 5 minutes ago. This is how I'm going to intentionally live now. Because every moment is the reset button where you say, okay, this is how I want to do it now. So yeah, that's not so short elevator pitch version, but I would say that to me is what makes Buddhism such a beautiful worldview and such a beautiful philosophy of a way of looking at life and living life, is that you can just strive to be a better whatever you already are. There is no big end goal.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing
Mhm.
that. I'm glad you fleshed that out a little bit more than just a quick answer because I you just have so much to offer, and anyone listening, I encourage you to check out the links that we have. Check out his book, get the book. It's really great. I mean, it's for beginners. I didn't really know anything, and I felt like I could have an intelligible conversation with somebody about Buddhism after I read the book. So, I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to even check out the subscription for the Sangha gathering. I'm gonna do that. I'm excited to join in on that. Anna, is there anything else you wanna ask before we close up?
No, not today. Man, it's been really, really nice meeting you, Noah. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to listening to more of your podcasts. And I'm curious about the Sangha too. So you might be seeing me in there as well.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
anyway, Noah, thank you so much for your time. We have thoroughly enjoyed this. I hope, the rest of your day gets even better.
Thank you. I do have one last thought that I think I want to share with the name of your podcast, Heretical Hippies. I love that. To anyone listening, if you, we all, I guess, I presume if you're listening to this podcast, you identify with that sense of the heretical label. I would invite you again to think we're all a heretic to someone else, right? So when we can embrace that reality that the way I'm living my life is wrong to someone somewhere, you'll never ever be living your life in a way that everyone's like, oh, yeah, you're living your life right. No, someone from a certain view is always going to think you're doing it wrong. And I struggled with that as a person who tends to want to be liked and to be a people pleaser. It was like, how can I get the most amount of people to validate the life path I'm on? But I love realizing that at some point I embraced the heretical nature of my life, that I am a heretic. We all are to someone, and unashamed now. It's like, yeah, I live my life my way, and it doesn't have to make sense to you. I use this analogy all the time with my paragliding. Why do I do it? Because I love it. And never in a million years would I say, hey, you're living your life wrong because you don't paraglide, because you might
Mm.
not like it. If you're afraid of heights, I would tell you, don't get into this. You're not going to like this. That's how I view Buddhism too. It's a worldview that to me makes sense and I enjoy it. It brings me joy, but I don't need to preach it to anyone because I don't think it is for everyone. But to the people who are looking for something like this, very much like paragliding, if you were like, "Oh, I always dreamt of flying and I want to see what that's like," I'd be like, "Try it because you might realize, holy cow, this is amazing. I'm flying." But I would never impose that on someone. And I just wanted to end it on that note with this idea of being a heretic. We're all a heretic to someone, but when we realize, yeah, I am a heretic. I'm doing it my way.
Mhm.
That's when you start to feel a greater sense of peace. You don't need to understand why I do my life my way, but I need to for me. And I feel comfortable and at peace because I know that I'm doing it in a way that feels authentic and makes sense in my heart. And it doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. So I love that in the title of your podcast, The Heretical Hippies. That's awesome. So to all the heretical hippies listening, embrace that and live your life in a heretical way of it's the way that makes sense to you. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else.
It's really a throwback to the authenticity you were talking about earlier in the podcast. It's this thread of authenticity with your wife and with your kids. And
Yes.
yeah, I love that. It's beautiful. And it's something, it just keeps coming up in my personal life as well. And that's the goal. We want to be authentic. And that's what we're learning how to do every day. And this heretical hippies is part of that. So thanks again, Noah.
Yeah, thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, man, that was so good. Like,
Yeah,
I have
that was really good.
goosebumps because genuinely, like, I know these are just regular people, right? Like they're just like you and I on podcasts. They're sharing their life's experience on a podcast. But like you hear the voice, you hear them express things, you hear the angst when they share difficult things. Like I've heard those things in his voice. And to put like a face with the voice and to actually get to interact, I don't know. That just feels crazy to me. I love how small the world becomes when we engage with other people's content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What a cool guy. I just love his story too. Like everything about just his journey to be more and more authentic, and then his wife's journey to be more and more authentic, and his kids' journey to be more and more
Yes.
authentic. And I personally, that word is really resonating in my own personal life right now. Like I'm working on evaluating my life to see if there's any lack of authenticity, because sometimes we don't realize that we're not
Mhm.
being authentic. We're just so used to, like he was saying, people pleasing or avoiding conflict or whatever, that we don't realize where we are hiding. And Noah realized it in his own marriage. And even though it risks possibly losing the most important person in his life, he knew he had to tell her where he was at. He had to be authentic to her, and it actually produced more life and more healing and deeper connection, and I found that to be true in my own marriage as well,
Same.
where I've had to be completely honest about some things that I thought were risky and or risking our marriage or risking our relationship or risking the depth of our connection, and it only created more depth.
I agree. I have several things I could share that specifically related to deconstruction that I was afraid to share because I was like, this might be the deal breaker. Like, I don't want to share this because it might be a deal breaker, but I also have to share it because otherwise I'm like, I feel like I'm living a lie.
Mhm.
And so obviously we're still married, so we know how the ending happened. But like, yeah, it's so refreshing to hear about somebody else having a similar experience, not just you, but also him. It's
Mhm.
possible. And it doesn't mean it's going to be everyone's experience. But
Mhm.
if you're afraid to share something with your partner, give them the benefit of the doubt. It may
Mhm.
just like create something more beautiful. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't, maybe that was supposed to be the end of a season for you. I don't know. But
Mhm.
man, so much respect for Noah and the way that they're parenting and navigating their differences in beliefs. I just feel like we could do a whole podcast on that alone. I would love to hear more wisdom on that.
Mhm.
I have more ideas now of how to share a little more openly about what I'm currently believing or things that I'm thinking about. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, and am also really just encouraged by, obviously, aside from the authenticity with Noah, the fact that he is doing the podcast and willing to not just be authentic with the people in his life, but also be authentic with the world and in his own way,
Yeah,
sharing his wisdom and what he's learned, and I think it's beautiful.
yeah. He's probably one of the most genuine people I've ever interacted with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's one of the coolest things about doing this podcast,
I
isn't
know.
it?
We get to meet the coolest people.
We do. We meet such neat people, and we have so many more interviews scheduled for the
Yeah, like
next
it's
couple of
almost
months.
entirely interviews. It's insane,
Yeah.
but
The
it's
rest of this
exciting.
year is gonna be a lot of interviews, but yeah, we're having a blast, and,
And we love
I love
sharing
it.
people like Noah with the world, with our world. So,
Yeah.
hopefully you guys can check him out. He's great. He's as great as he sounds on the podcast. Yeah, so, okay, Anna, you do your closeout and then I'll do mine.
Peace out, my precious friends.
Oh, you get serenaded this time. I'm just gonna stick with the classic, "Peace out."
We're both being authentic here.
That's right. Nailed it. Hey, if you made it this far, damn, you're a rock star. Thank you so much for listening to us and let us know who you are. We want to hear from your sweet little face.
Check back in for the next episode to experience more hippie nonsense, talk more heresy, and share more laughs.